child custody can feel very overwhelming. That's a statement that's true not just for parents, but also for practitioners. There are lots of details that go into planning a proper custody agreement, and there's lots of things to consider when you're thinking as a parent about, is this agreement one that's going to be very good for my kids long term? So if you are facing a child custody situation, maybe you need to modify an agreement, maybe you're starting with the very first agreement. I want you to watch this video because we are going to cover soup to nuts, everything that goes into making or resolving child custody. But first, we have to know what's custody. And custody in New York State is two things. Both need to be resolved in order to resolve the topic of custody. The first item is legal custody. That's decision making for the children. These are big decisions, not day to day, like their bedtime or what time they get up in the morning, but large decisions like medical decisions, educational decisions, such as do they need an IEP? What supports do they get in their IEP? Heck, are they going to a public school versus a private school? Those are legal custody decisions. The other custodial decision that needs to be made is physical custody. Physical custody is where is that child laying their head every single night? And one parent might have primary physical custody, it might be shared between the two parents or a variety of other arrangements. But to resolve the topic of custody, you must resolve both legal custody and physical custody. So first, let's talk about legal custody. I will be very honest that in New York State, a lot of judges assume it's going to be what's called joint legal custody. And that might be the case in your situation, but you should know about the different forms of legal custody to be fully advised and understand your rights in this arena. So what I consider the three main options. The first being joint custody, joint legal custody. That's what it kind of sounds like. So joint legal custody is where you both have to discuss and agree upon the legal custody issue. So that could be what doctor our child is going to, what school they're going to, what religion they're being raised in, or how they're being raised. You can, under joint legal custody, list out the areas that are to fall within legal custody. You also don't have to if you don't list them out. The case law does a fairly good job of outlining that legal custody addresses large decisions, educational, medical, religion, and general welfare and upbringing. The other form of custody that you might see in the court system is what's called sole legal custody. Sole legal custody is also kind of what it sounds like. It is where one parent has sole decision-making on either all of the areas of legal custody or specific, defined areas of legal custody. And the terms related to that sole legal custody could be just simply this individual has sole legal custody, or it could provide the other parent right of access to medical records or right to to make their position known on an issue, even though the legal custodian has no obligation to consider it. So sole legal custody could just be very simple. Parent A is granted sole legal custody, or it could have a few caveats. And then the last type of category that you might see is it's called a variety of things. It could be called modified joint legal custody, or it could be called the joint legal custody with zones of decision making, a variety of things. But generally in this area, what we're talking about is something where the parents have to discuss and agree. And if they cannot agree, there is one parent who is granted as the final decision maker. And that parent could have final decision making on all of the areas of legal custody or on certain select areas. What I have absolutely seen in some instances is where one parent, parent A, is granted decision-making in educational, and parent B is granted decision-making in medical or extracurricular. Again, similar to sole legal custody, you can have a very simple one where parent A is granted modified joint legal custody with final decision-making on all issues. Or you can have it a little bit more complicated where maybe parent A has one area and parent B has another. It can look a variety of different ways. While we're on the topic of legal custody, we should talk about what does a court look at when they're deciding legal custody. And here they're really looking at how do these two parents work together? Are they able to put aside their differences and make decisions for the children? Has there been a history where one parent has just not been involved in these decisions? And so the other parent is very well versed in maybe the medical issues that the child faces or the educational issues that the child faces. If the parents consistently are able to make a decision, right? There might be some disagreement, but they are generally able to make a decision. You'll typically see joint legal custody being awarded. But in instances where that doesn't make sense, maybe the parents might be able to make a decision, but it takes them 5 hours to discuss Christmas parenting time. Maybe in those situations, you would see something different from a judge, like modified joint legal custody or sole legal custody. While we're on this topic, I want to just pause and point out one large myth, which is that there's always one parent that wins. It's always the mom that gets it, or it's always the dad. There is no one sex that always gets the specific award of custody. None. I have seen it go to mom. I have seen it go to dad. I have seen it go to both. So it truly depends on the facts of the case and the judge that you have. Now we should talk about parenting time. Parenting time, right? That's physical custody. Is, like I said, where does your child lay their head every single night? I like to think of it as falling into 3 different buckets or types of schedules or arrangements. One where you have a primary parent and the other parent has parenting time. So that could look like parent A has the children primarily and parent B gets them every other weekend and Wednesday through Thursday overnight. The second type of schedule is a 50-50, so an equally shared parenting time schedule. And then the last schedule is where I kind of think of it like a mix and match. So maybe during the school year, there's one schedule that's in place, and in the summer months, there's a different schedule in place. You'll typically see something like that in instances where maybe the parents don't live very close together. It's difficult for the children to go between the houses relatively frequently. Or you have a situation where there is a parent that's a teacher and they have the summer months off. So it makes sense for them to have a little more parenting time in the summer rather than children going to a daycare provider. Under the parenting time umbrella is also the determination of holiday time, vacation time, as well as time for what I call days of significance. So like Mother's Day, Father's Day, other days that are significant for your family. That could be a child's birthday or a parent's birthday. Heck, I've even seen people put in there like Christmas tree day. It's really whatever is important and significant to your family and a tradition you want to see continued. When we are talking through these 2 topics, legal custody and physical custody, courts make a decision about those based upon the best interests of the child standard. And this is a term that you likely have heard of, right? Best interests of the child, best interests of the child. Well, what is it? In New York State, there is no specific definition of what best interests of a child is. I can tell you that the only factor that a court is mandated to consider is the presence of domestic violence in the relationship. So that is a mandated factor. Every other factor, and that's mandated by statute, every other factor is developed under case law, and a judge holds the discretion as to whether and how much to consider it. So when you're talking about the best interest standards, certainly if there's domestic violence present in the relationship, that is something to focus on because it's a required factor to consider. Other factors you might want to consider or might need to consider in your situation is, are there any special needs for that child? Developmentally, educationally, anything like that. What's the distance between the 2 parents' homes? Do they literally live around the block from each other, or are we talking about the distance between here and California? Other schedule or other things to consider are a parent's stability. And this looks a couple of different ways. So stability could be, is there a drug or alcohol problem? Is it currently happening? Is it currently unstable? Is it a drug or alcohol problem that happened in the past and the parent has really rehabilitated themselves and been sober and clean for years? Stability comes in a variety of different forms. Another version of stability looks like a parent that has a consistent job, a consistent home, versus a parent that doesn't have a consistent job for whatever reason. Now, they might have a very good explanation, right? Maybe they just consistently work at places that tend to close down. Or they're a very volatile employee and they continually get terminated and they're constantly losing their job. Maybe they're constantly losing their home. That lack of stability is very important for a judge to be aware of and to consider. There's a variety of other factors that come into play when you're talking about legal custody, but I do think that those are some of the biggest ones. Of course, another factor that you might run into is it's deemed a couple of different things, but it's generally considered a parent's ability to support the relationship between the child and the other parent. It used to be called parental alienation, right? Is there any alienation of affection? But judges, the whole alienation concept, it's sort of been debunked. So rather than using the terms alienation, the best way to approach that is there a parent that is denying or impacting the affection between parent and other child, or child and the other parent? Before we move on, I do want to note that that there are other factors that used to be very, very relevant and prominent, and over the years have sort of lost, in most cases, their weight. So one factor used to be the primary caregiver. It definitely is a relevant factor, but judges see it as a little less relevant now because typically both parents are in the home, are in the workforce. Even in a situation where one parent has been at home, most of the time the finances don't allow for that to continue. So you're going to have a situation where both parents are going to be in the workforce. Another situation that I've seen be less relevant is parental involvement. So sometimes there's a situation where during the marriage, one parent is the parent that just generally handles the stuff, right? They handle the doctor's appointments, getting to and from the practices, the sleepover coordination, all of the stuff. And that parent, understandably so, feels like that should be considered. I think that the weight a judge gives to that will very much depend on the facts of the case. So if that's your situation, you definitely want to make sure that you connect with your attorney and talk that through to make sure that your position is appropriately poised. So now that we understand what custody is, what standard guides it, and the different arrangements that you might have, let's talk about how we get from we're going to separate to a custody order. All of this requires negotiation, of course, and in some instances, a trial. And when you're finally getting to the nuts and bolts, either the final terms of the settlement agreement or the final terms that you want to submit to the judge, be sure to keep an eye out for these things. Is it clear what our legal custody arrangement is? Is it clear what items we consider falling under legal custody? Do we need to list out areas that don't need general agreement? That is going to be a decision that you need to make with your attorney. Sometimes the less said, the better, but sometimes it can be very helpful to have a clear boundary that, nope, we do not need to discuss this topic, like the bedtime, for example. You're also going to want to include under legal custody general statements about making sure each parent supports the other relationship with the other parent, and perhaps you might want to include in there also the requirement to go to co-parent counseling. There's a million other terms that you could include under legal custody, but those are the biggest ones that you're definitely going to want to make sure you are looking for as in your agreement or in whatever you're submitting to the judge. For parenting time arrangements, you absolutely want to make sure that the basic schedule is clear. And when I say what the basic schedule, that doesn't just mean, on Mondays, here's where Tommy goes, and on Tuesdays, here's where Susie goes. What I mean is the day-to-day schedule, the exchange times, and if you don't have exchange times, I find it to be very valuable to add them in, and how the exchanges are going to happen. Perhaps the parents are going to meet up somewhere, or perhaps the children will transfer between houses via the bus. Whatever it is, make it clear in the agreement. You're also going to want to list out your holiday schedule, what vacation time rights each parent has, any specific days of significance. And then from there, every family is going to vary as to whether or not they put in additional terms about potentially rights of first refusal, additional communication requirements, using a co-parenting app, how long-distance relationships between the parents might be handled. So if a parent lives over in California, how could they get additional time with the children that live here? And the last thing that you're probably going to want to make sure is included somewhere in parenting time is the ability to FaceTime your children. Because when they're with the other parent, you might want to be able to FaceTime with them. And building in that right can be very helpful. That way you're not fighting against somebody. The last consideration that I do think could be important for most schedules is including some sort of term that if there's going to be the ability to modify the schedule as the parents mutually agree, as well as if there's a vacation, how and when a parent needs to notify of the request to use vacation time. It could be that you could notify about using vacation on 30 days notice. It could be that you two select a specific day each year, and that's when you'll provide your notice of intended vacation, or something completely different. But make it clear as to how you provide notice for intended vacations. The last item I want to cover is how do we get this document into writing and set you up for success in a co-parenting relationship. Now, getting the document into writing, that shouldn't be too hard. If you have an attorney, your attorney or the other attorney may draft it up. If you're in court, the judge will either issue it as part of their decision, or the judge could assist you in drafting it as part of a court order. You're going to want to make sure you look through that agreement, verify that it complies with what your understanding of the agreement is. And remember, when you're looking through that document, it's helpful to look at it through the lens of, well, if somebody wanted to misuse these terms, could they? How would that work? I always find that spending a little bit of time really critically reading an agreement can lead me to more clear language and thus fewer disputes in the future. Now, to set yourself up for co-parenting success, you're going to want to do the next few things. First, really consider putting in your agreement the requirement to use a co-parenting app. They honestly reduce a lot of the stress and feeling that everything is all over, right? It's in email, it's in the shared calendar, it's in the Venmo requests. These co-parenting apps are fantastic because you have messaging features, shared calendars, the ability to reimburse each other right within one central spot. And it's also often documentation that is admissible in court, which makes it much easier on your attorney. And then other ways to set yourself up for co-parenting success include thinking through your communication and not just how you're going to respond, but do I truly need to respond? Keeping your communication very short, informative, and friendly and firm, the BIF method, is incredibly valuable in many relationships and particularly in high conflict relationships. And just remembering that your co-parent, they may not want to collaborate, and that's okay. All that you guys need to do is at least be able to communicate enough to get it done for the kids. You don't have to be buddy buddies. That'd be great, but you don't have to be buddy buddies. You just have to get it done for the kids. I hope this was a helpful video. I know that we covered a lot of information in a fairly short span of time. So to sum it up, be sure that whenever you're talking about custody, you're talking about both legal custody and physical custody. You're being as detailed as possible while also making sure that you're not setting yourself up to being trapped in terms that could unnecessarily restrict you. And lastly, make sure when you're going through things in a custody matter that you're being as precise and simple in your communication, not antagonizing. My hope is that this primer is helpful so that as you walk away from this video, you have a better understanding of what truly does need to go into a custody order and how a judge might see your situation. Certainly, this video doesn't replace independent legal advice. This is mere information. From here, your next step should be consider reaching out to an attorney for a consult. You can then get very good independent legal information from that consult. That can help shape the strategy that you have going forward. But maybe you're not at that point yet. That's okay. If you want more information, go visit my website. There's tons of tools and resources and downloads, articles, everything that I can think to give to you, I've tried to put it there. So maybe go visit my website, look around, see if you can find some other answers to your questions. And if you still have questions, just reach out. We are always happy to provide independent legal advice via a consult. I hope you found this video helpful.